Good afternoon, everybody. I want to welcome you to this webinar about best practices for environmental detection and monitoring of SARS-CoV-2 and airborne viruses with the Coriolis air samplers. My name is Chanterium and I am your host today. In today's lecture, you will receive information about an innovative clone technology, giving air sampling a new dimension and creating possibilities for new applications for a safer environment. The lecture will be given by Sophie Dubac. She is a graduated with a master's degree in biology and has worked as a life science application and product specialist at the Bertin Technologies for more than 5 years. She was involved in the development and applications of the Coriolis air sampler. Through her daily work, Sophie Dubac supports and advises users in their air quality control process. Our second speaker, who will give you some tips and tricks and case studies, is Mariana Gaboriau. Mariana is an application engineer at Bertin Technologies, and she holds a double PhD in environmental studies and in ecology and evolution. She has a great understanding of statistical modeling, bioinformatics, and molecular biology tools. But before we start the session, please let me inform that we will record this training. The recording will be sent to you after the session, but you can also always go back to our website, and in the site events, you will find all recordings of webinars we had and webinars that we will hold in the future. We will also send you a certificate of attendance after the session. And for the questions, as we have a lot of people, quite a lot of people joining, we would like to answer them at the end of the session. So you can submit them anytime and we will pick them up at the end. Finally, may I also ask you to fill in the survey at the end of the session, because it's quite important for us to get your feedback. We always want to improve for the future. So this all said, I would like to give the word to Sophie. Thank you all for joining.
Hi everyone, my name is Sophie Dubac. I'm working at Bertin Technology and I'm happy today to present you the best practices for environmental detection and monitoring of SARS-CoV-2 and airborne viruses with our Coriolis air samplers. So within the agenda, I will start with a short presentation of our Coriolis air samplers. Then Mariana will continue the session with some tips and tricks on how to collect viruses. And as Jen mentioned, some case studies about the collection of specific viruses with the Coriolis. Regarding the Coriolis air samplers, I want to introduce briefly who is Bertin Technology and the complete range that we have in life sciences instrumentation. So Bertin Technologies is an engineering company based in France who offer different type of instrumentation and premium solution in life sciences. So today we will speak about our air samplers, the Coriolis, but we also promote a sample preparation instrument, which is the Coriolis, which is able to homogenize any type of biological sample. We also have a huge range of biomarker detection and ELISA kits, and we also are able to manage some technology on demand if you need to have a new instrument that is not existing in the market. Regarding the Coriolis and the air sampling technology, Bertin is proud to have more than 15 years of experience of weight cyclone technology. The story began so more than 15 years ago with two projects, one European project which required to collect efficiently pollen in the air, and the second one was with the French Army in 2006, which asked Bertin to develop an instrument which will be able to collect any biological warfare agent. such as pestis, anthrax, and tularemia. Following these two projects, we decided to launch on the market one instrument called the Coriolis Micro, which is able since 2009. It's a patented technology with a cyclone which is able to collect the sample, any biological sample, and I will introduce you in the next few slides the exact technology which is behind the Coriolis Micro. At the beginning of the pandemic, 2 years ago, we launched the Coriolis Compact, which is a new version of the Coriolis with a patented dry cyclonic technology. And same thing, I will explain you a little bit deeper the principle of the technology. Regarding the Coriolis, we have today Coriolis everywhere around the world in different topics and markets, as you can see on this slide. So the Coriolis is really able to collect any type of biological sample, such as bacteria, fungi, toxins, allergen, pollen, and viruses. And as you can see, it can be used outside, indoor, or in any type of market, such as agro-food market with the avian flu, for example, or at the hospital if you need. And Mariana will introduce you at the end of the presentation, so 4 case studies in 4 different environments. Regarding the technical information, you can find back on this presentation the difference between the two Coriolis. The Coriolis Compact, which is smaller, really light, only 1.5 kilograms, with 8 hours of autonomy and an airflow of 50 liters per minute. One of the main advantages of the Coriolis Compact is that you have a concentrated sample at the end as you collect on a dry cone, so without any liquids. Regarding the Coriolis Micro, the weight is around 2.8 kilograms. You have 1 hour autonomy of battery, and the airflow can be higher than 50 liters per minute, as you can go between 100 to 300 liters per minute. The main advantages of the Coriolis Micro is that you collect the microorganisms in a liquid, so it's compatible with viral culture, but also with classical microbiological culture. Regarding the technology, you can see here that the technology is a cyclonic technology, meaning that when you start the instrument, so with the Coriolis Micro, you put liquid in the cone, you start the instrument, and there is an aspiration which is created. So a cyclone is created inside the cone, and air and particles enter into the cone and form a vortex. All the aspirated particles are centrifuged with the collection liquid in the cone. And at the end, when you stop the instrument, all the particles are concentrated into the collection liquid. Regarding the Coriolis Compact, it's a dry cyclonic technology, meaning that you are working same thing with an aspiration. So when you start the instrument, aspirated air goes through the cones and all the particles are retained in the cone wall, but not in the liquid, as there is no liquid. At the end of the collection, you will recover all the particles by rinsing the cones, and Mariana will give you other tips inside this presentation. Regarding the importance of biocontamination and control of the indoor and outdoor air quality, we all be sure that the COVID-19 bring a new vision of the air quality in terms of microbiology. If you see this timeline, you can see that in only 2 years, we really make a big step in terms of indoor and outdoor air quality. As we all know, the first case of COVID-19 was reported early in December 2019, and we have the first paper about the use of the Coriolis micro for SARS-CoV-2 detection in June 2020. Today, we have more than 10 papers mentioning the Coriolis micro used for the SARS-CoV-2 detection during the pandemic. In terms of market and use, if we are focusing only on airborne viruses, we know that it can be really useful in the food industry, for example, to collect SARS-CoV-2, but not only, also to collect bacteriophages, for example, that we know affecting a production, meaning that if you have a contamination with bacteriophage, you know that you need to throw away all the production. Also, we have a huge impact in the veterinary environment, as the Coriolis compact can be used to monitor viral contamination of livestock in farms. Not only with the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic, we know that we had some avian flu pandemic in Europe, and the Coriolis compact was used to follow this epidemic. Of course, we all know that the main environment where the Coriolis can be used is in the health environment, mainly to detect viruses in hospitals or nursing homes. Also, we want to protect the workers, and more it can be used in office spaces to check decontamination, for example, or to assure a low level of contamination in an office to employees. Now I will let the word to Mariana for the tips and tricks, and she will give you some additional information on how to use the Coriolis to collect viruses in the air.
Hi, everyone. So as Sophie just mentioned, I'm going to try to talk a little bit about how viruses are, well, as you can see in this image, transmitted through aerosols, and how some simple tips and tricks could really help you optimize the protocol of air collection to have positive detection when you know there's virus in the air. So this is just to summarize how indeed the distance matters when you're thinking on the protocol of collection for bioaerosols in general, but for viruses especially, as they have a very small size. You know that the large infectious droplets are going to be very close to the subject that is contaminated, and as you move farther away, then there's a higher risk of missing the detection and getting a false negative. Then if we go to the next slide, we'll see some key points to take also into consideration when we think of virus detection. There are some key challenges that must be taken into account as well to optimize our protocol of collections. As I just mentioned, we know that viruses are very small particles, so that is an intrinsic difficulty that we have to consider. And they are also quite fragile, so we're going to have also difficulties to maintain their integrity and viability if we want to culture the virus afterwards. This have some important connotations, because these physical and biological challenges for the efficacy of virus detection can lead to conclusions that have an impact directly to human health. As we saw in a systematic review that was funded by the World Health Organization, that was published right at the beginning of the, well, not right at the beginning of the pandemic, but it was kind of later, based on the first publications that came at the beginning of the pandemic, that because it was very hard to recover viral culture samples of SARS-CoV, then we couldn't really have made conclusions about the airborne transmission of the virus. So it's just to show how important these challenges and the efficacy of biological and physical detection of viruses are in optimizing and obtaining a good protocol for the collection of bioparticles in general. We also have to consider other challenges, like besides the detection of the instrument itself and its efficacy, we have so many other factors and variables that are playing in the environment when we think about droplets that are being transported around between the animal that is going to be probably infected from the environment, or the transmission from the animal to human, or a reverse zoonotic case as well, from humans to animals. Just one of the cases that I'm actually going to discuss later on. So the intrinsic factors of each one of these players in the system, like age, sex, the immune system, the living style, behavior, you name it, there are so many variables that we cannot control that also need to be considered in order to really make the best of our protocol and optimize it as much as we can. So to sum up some of the things as well, so all of these challenges are just when we're talking about the sampling strategy and how to define it. But we also have to consider that there's a whole workflow and steps that come afterwards, after the sampling, that have also an impact on the results that we're going to obtain. We have to take care of how we are going to collect the sample, like in which media, which are the liquids that are going to really help us maintain the viability of the virus, for example, if that's what we're looking for, how we are going to store this sample after collection, and the decontamination procedures as well. So there's, just to show you, there's a whole workflow from sampling to analysis and many other steps that you should also be thinking of before starting your project and being able to really come up with a plan that is going to help you obtain the results that you hoped. So in the next slide, we're going to start really pointing out some of the key points for the best practices that we have identified. And this is coming from feedback from you, from like clients, researchers, and people that have used our instruments and have done the hard work and the field work. We've just tried to take them all in and summarize this to come up with a synthesis and some points that will help you in the future optimize your protocols faster. So in terms of airflow rates, we usually recommend, we're talking about virus in this moment, so we usually recommend an airflow rate of 200 liters per minute. That would be the ideal if you want to preserve the viability of the virus, if you're looking for culturing afterwards. But we have also seen positive detection of viruses with a protocol of 300 liters per minute. Again, it really depends on the density of the virus in the air as well. So those are things that you might want to consider. In the case of the Coriolis micro, therefore the Coriolis compact, the airflow rate is limited to 50 liters per minute and it's constant, so you cannot play with that. In that case, you can adjust the sampling duration. For that, we consider that for the correlation of viruses, you should consider sampling for at least 20 minutes, regardless of the airflow rate that you choose. Of course, depending on the air volume of the place where you're collecting, you might want to increase it even further than 30 minutes, but we consider that that should be like the minimum to be on the safe side of the positive detection and avoiding false negatives. In terms of the position of the device, we have also noticed that it is a very important thing to consider during the protocol of collection. Of course, as I mentioned before, because of the droplet size, you want to be as close as possible if you're doing the detection from a contaminated subject in particular. But if you're just trying to sample a whole area, a whole room, then we would suggest to move the instrument during the collection of air, like start from the furthest distance away and move closer to the patient or subject. Try to do multiple sampling points in that same room. So just to make sure that you're not just focusing on one spot where the air might not be flowing as much, or you have a patch that is more concentrated than in other parts of the room that you're sampling. Then again, talking about the sampling liquid, as I mentioned before, is a very important factor to consider. In terms of liquid for virus-laden aerosols, we have found that PBS seems to work the best. This is the most commonly used one in the literature. We will also see results that have been positive for the detection of SARS-CoV using culture media, MEM or GM as well. So the choice is still very free for the detection of viruses and other bioaerosols. On the other hand, you should avoid most RNA shields because they have very high evaporation rates, and when you're using a cyclonic airflow rate of over 200 liters for a long period of time, then you might find yourself with no liquid at all, or like your whole liquid might have been evaporated. So there's something that you need to consider in the cases that you're starting with a liquid like RNA later or something like that. We do recommend for starting sampling volume 15 milliliters generally, but you can adjust it between 5 and 15, depending again on the evaporation rate that you have in your environment. For the storage of the samples before transportation, then as you know, for most samples to preserve the integrity of your nucleic acids, you should really store them as soon as possible, up to 24 hours at 4 degrees at least for short-term storage, and then of course for long-term cryotubes and -20 or -80, depending on what you're trying to look for or try to do in your downstream application. Then for processing of the samples, in the case of Coriolis micro, because we are starting with a collection on liquid, depending on the volume that you started with, you're gonna find yourself probably with around 10 milliliters at the end of the collection time, doing a classic 300 liter per minute during 10 minutes, if you started with 15 milliliters. So it's very flexible in that sense, and we do recommend that you centrifuge or reconcentrate your samples with a filtration device afterwards. That would really help you improve the yield of the molecule that you're looking for afterwards. So just concentrate your sample as much as possible. There are different techniques, as I mentioned. Then you can also start with a very short amount and repeating without readjusting the volume of liquid during the collection time. So then you'll find yourself with a very slow, low volume automatically just due to the evaporation. For the case of the Coriolis compact, then it would be easier because you are collecting already on a dry cone. So it's really up to you to add the volume that you desire with whatever liquid you desire as well. What it's going to be important then is to try to detach these particles that are kind of collapse against the walls of the cone, the interior walls of the cone. So we recommend using either a swab that you can use to kind of scrub around the cone and resuspend all the cells in the liquid that you use for the recovering of your sample. We have also noticed or heard people that use sonication as well to help detach the particles from the wall of the cone, or simply vortexing or just shaking them up and down. That would also help you. It depends on what you have available at hand. when you're going to treat your sample. Then for analysis of the samples, well, because you're recovering your sample finally on a liquid, either with the Coriolis micro or with a compact, then you really have a sample that will be compatible with all the rapid microbiology techniques or molecular biology techniques. Where it's also an advantage is that you could then use the same sample and divide it into several aliquots, and you can do multiple analysis with the exact same sample. So that is something that could be really useful. In terms of decontamination, for the Coriolis micro particularly, that has several pieces that are detachable, you can autoclave the cane and the air intake and the sampling cones. For the Coriolis compact, you cannot. The cones are on single use only, so you just throw them away as a consumable. You can also soak the detachable parts on a commercial bleach solution or on a solution of ethanol at 70%. And if you want a more thorough decontamination of the interior of the instrument as well, then we have tested that it can withstand the vapor of H2O2, hydrogen peroxide, sorry. So that would not corrode the engine. And you can also, for those that do not have this technology, you can also try with the Coriolis micro. You can run a cone filled with ethanol for 15 minutes at maximum speed to try to also decontaminate a little the interior of the instrument.
So thank you, Mariana, for the tips and tricks presentation. We will now introduce you 4 different case studies, so dedicated to viruses, but as you understand, the Coriolis is also able to collect any type of biological particles. So today we will present first a study around SARS-CoV-2 in hospital. The second case study will be around the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 by children attending school. The third one, as I mentioned, it will be in another environment, as it's the study of SARS-CoV-2 outbreaks in naturally infected milk farms. We all know that there was a huge topic during the pandemic around the transmission into milk farms. And the fourth one will be with another virus, which will be the norovirus, during the toilet flushing, and how the virus spread when you flush the toilet. Mariana, again on your side.
Thank you, Safi. So we'll start, as you saw before, talking mostly about SARS-CoV-2 detection, but it's just as an example of how you can also detect other type of viruses. The first case study that we wanted to present to you is a very recent paper that just came out from Dr. Jacob Lundell and Sarah Tresson about the detection of SARS-CoV-2 in hospitals. The effects of the different procedures that can generate aerosols in the hospital, the effect of HEPA filtration units, the patient viral load, and physical distance. And we thank, of course, Dr. Jacob for sharing the results and letting us present it to you and share it with our community. So what they wanted to do in this study was really to do kind of a sensitivity analysis. They wanted to identify different situations, different characteristics of the patients, the environmental parameters, and the type of procedures that could generate aerosols. And all of that will be associated, and how all of that will be associated with airborne SARS-CoV-2 virus transmission. In order to do that, they carried out a very large sampling scheme. They collected over 300 air samples around different areas of the hospital, 3 infectious disease wards, multiple intensive care units, 3 medical wards that were converted to COVID-19 units, and 1 emergency department. Then they really tested different distances from the patient's head in order to see the sensitivity detection of the Coriolis from less than 1 meter, between 1 and 2 meters, or between 2 and 4 meters from the patient's head. In terms of the protocol of collection, they were again using the Coriolis micro air sampler at 200 liters per minute for 10 minutes, corresponding to then a total of 2 cubic meter of air. And they use as a solution 15 milliliters of PBS. For the analysis, it was like standard RT-qPCR after RNA extraction, of course. And what they found was that indeed 8% of the samples had positive detection of viral RNA. Of the 231 samples that they took from patient rooms, 10% were positive for SARS-CoV RNA. Then from the samples that were collected from other areas like work corridors were also positive, 3 out of 51 samples. And even in the Avantor rooms, they found one of the samples out of 15 that was positive for SARS-CoV-2 RNA. They did not, however, detect the presence of viral RNA in the public areas of the hospital. So this paper, I think, would be very helpful for those of you who are interested in really optimizing your protocol of collection for viral detection to really see the distances, the efficiency of collection, depending on many other characteristics that you can find typically in a hospital. Then we pass on, we keep on the subject of SARS-CoV-2 detection, but now we're talking about schools and children. This was a very interesting paper that was published right at the beginning, I believe, of well, that started right at the beginning of the pandemic, was published, of course, a bit later on. And it was on the transmission of SARS-CoV-2 by children to contacts in school and their households as well. So it was a prospective cohort environmental sampling study that was carried out in London. They wanted to see how the virus was transmitted by children and young people in the school settings to outside of the school. So they actually collected air samples in the households as well of the infected children, as well as in their schools. They collected surface swabs as well in the same rooms that were used to collect the air samples, and some environmental sampling also was carried out. All of that every week for up to 28 days. They used the Coriolis micro for this analysis. The protocol of collection was 300 liters per minute during 10 minutes. And they also used 15 milliliters of PBS as the collection liquid. And once more, the analysis was an RT-qPCR after RNA extraction. In this case, they found that air samples were positive also in 50% of the homes that had symptomatic cases, so people who were shedding a moderate amount of virus. These positive air samples were collected in the rooms where the children were playing, or in a room where the child had been playing and had just recently vacated. Then they found some air samples that were not positive in the homes of 2 asymptomatic cases, even though the viral shedding was high in one of those cases. So I forgot probably to mention, they were also taking samples on the children themselves to see if they were still being positive for the detection of SARS-CoV with the regular detection techniques that we all use for quite a while now. Nonetheless, none of the samples was positive for culture afterwards. And so this was another case of SARS-CoV detection in schools. Now we're gonna move to the next slide, where we're gonna keep talking about SARS-CoV-2, but now using the Coriolis compact and in a very different setting. This was to document the outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 in a naturally infected mink farm, impact, transmission dynamics, genetic patterns, and environmental contamination. So the objective of the study was to investigate the SARS-CoV-2 infection outbreak and what were some of the parameters associated with the transmission of the virus, the immunity, the pathology, and environmental contamination in these animal farms. For sampling, they were collecting air and dust samples from different animal sheds in mink farms in Greece in February of 2021. So 113 and 30 days after the beginning of the outbreaks in Farm A and Farm B, respectively. And as I mentioned before, for the collection protocol, they used the Coriolis compact at a flow rate of 50 liters per minute for 25 minutes. And in this case, you can see, and I find that it's a very useful paper for documenting the positioning of the air sampler relating to the position of the infected subject and the position of the different infrastructure and the arrangement of the infrastructure in the environment. And again, for the analysis, it was RT-qPCR after RNA analysis. What they found was that indeed some of the samples were positive at Farm A. Excuse me. At Farm A, all of the samples that were collected in fixed spots were negative. And in Farm A, at day 30, the air samples that were collected while moving the instrument around were positive. All of the samples in the same farm that were collected from fixed spots were negative. And this is one of the papers that we used to come up with the recommendations that I mentioned before, the importance of taking samples from different points in the same room or moving around while you're collecting the air sample as well. And for the final case study, now we move away from SARS-CoV detection, and we're going to talk about the determination of murine norovirus aerosol concentration during toilet flushing. This was an interesting case, and we thank Dr. Boyles for letting us share the information with you. So what they wanted to do was to determine if toilet flushing is really a source of aerosol generation using a surrogate murine norovirus. In order to do that, they used a flushometer that was seeded with 50 milliliters of a solution of murine norovirus, diluted to different concentrations, 10 to the power 5 and 10 to the power 6 PFU. And they conducted 6 trials consisting on 12 control samples, 12 aerosol samples, and 6 toilet water samples. And for the collection protocol, they used the Coriolis micro at a rate of 150 liters per minute for 30 minutes. And they used 15 milliliters of HBBS as a liquid solution. In this case, for the detection of the virus, they used digital PCR. And what we found is that at the lowest concentration of the murine norovirus, none of the aerosol samples detected the presence of the RNA of the virus, but that for the seeding concentration of 10 to the power of 6, the aerosol samples that were collected using the Coriolis micro were positive across all trials, with concentrations that range from 383 to 684 RNA copies per cubic meter. They also use different samplers and they compare the results between samplers as well. And as you can see on the table, the results that they obtained with the Coriolis micro were the best. So that is just to show how the Coriolis is a very efficient tool to detect and collect viruses, not only SARS-CoV, but really any type of airborne viruses, which is also reflected in this slide where we summarize briefly the number of publications that have been coming out since 2010, the launch, 1 year after the launch of the Coriolis Micro. As you can see on the graph on the left, it's been steadily increasing with this jump on 2021, when you can see the proportion of the taxon that has been studied shifted really from majority bacteria and fungi to now a very large proportion, almost half and half, of virus detection compared to bacteria as well.
So thanks, Mariana,
and with that,
for all.
I will give back the word to Sophie. Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mariana, for all the case studies. So just one slide to conclude that the Coriolis is really easy to set up, and as you understand, in only 3 steps you can have answers regarding the contamination in the air with microorganisms. The only thing I would say you need to do is to collect your sample with the Coriolis, remove the cone and send it to the lab. And then what is the main advantage of the Coriolis is that you can analyze it by any type of analysis to have sample fast results of your collection. I would like to thank everyone for the listening the webinar, and so I think that now we will start the Q&A session. We have few questions, but don't hesitate to keep continuing to answering your question in the specifics box. We have some specific questions, so we will contact the people after the meeting, but for some global question, we have one question regarding the decontamination. Can you recommend a validate procedure for decontamination of the instrument with H2O2 showing effective inactivation of DNA? So Mariana, I will answer this one. So yes, we have a specific protocol to give to you regarding the H2O2 decontamination on the instrument. There is a specific mode that you can activate to do the decontamination within the H2O2. So it's, I will say, easy if you have the installation that you in your lab with H2O2 vapor, meaning you have a specific, you already are able to use H2O2 vapor. You just need to select the good the good menu in the Coriolis, and then launch the protocol, and we can give you the time and level of H2O2 without any issue. We have one question regarding the collection liquid. So it seems that some people can have issue with the PBS as it presents some salt. But the other, if I regroup all the questions regarding the collection liquid, Mariana, what type of liquid collection should be used to collect the COVID-19 or any type of other particles?
Yeah, so it would depend if, as I showed you with the multiple case studies, PBS is really one of the most commonly used. It is true that it contains salt, so you have to be careful in terms of the evaporation rate to not let it evaporate as much. So I would suggest that if you need to concentrate a lot of your sample, then start with a small volume to begin with. That would allow you to not have to run as much as a longer collection time. That would then increase the risk of maybe accumulating salts inside of the engine. But then if you're looking for culturing viruses, then I would suggest that you do not use PBS and you start with a culture liquid media directly.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. We have another question. Have you other example of viral collection other than SARS-CoV-2 detected in patient rooms at the hospital?
That is a good question. Actually, no. From the moment in hospitals, the only virus that have been studied using the Coriolis has been the SARS-CoV-2. But I do know of a recent publication that just came out, and we're going to have coming shortly also an application note about it. It's the detection of many type of viruses, waterborne viruses, on a wastewater treatment plant. So I think we do not have a case specifically inside a patient room, but we do have the protocols and the proven recommendations on how to detect any other type of viruses that are aerosolized in the air. So
I think at the hospital, I don't know all the publication, as Mariana show you, there is a lot, but I think we have several publication around the syncytial viruses. So we have some, not specifically in patient room, but at the hospital, we have several publication around these viruses also. So if I go back to other question, just let me check. So we have question around the cones. Would the cones are reusable or made of plastic or glass?
yes, so the cones in both cases for the Coriolis micro and the compact are made of plastic. But in the case of the Coriolis micro, they are autoclavable. You can reuse them for a limited number of times, of course, because you can imagine the plastic is going to brittle over time. So eventually you want to change them and replace them. In the case of the Coriolis compact, they are single use only. So you cannot autoclave them.
Thank you, Mariana. We have another question regarding okay, how you take out the cone. Is it dangerous, and do you need specific protective PPE, or how do you manage the cone here?
So I would suggest, as with any other case study, you follow the rules of the place where you're working with. So in a lab, and if you are dealing with potentially pathogens, viruses or bacteria, then yes, of course, I would recommend the use of PPE. But just because out of best practices on a lab, there's really very limited risk of contamination once you unscrew the cone to recover your sample. In the case of the collection on liquid, then re-aerolization of the particles is going to be very, very minimal. So I do not think that would be necessary in that case.
Okay.
And same in the case of the Coriolis compact, the cap size and the particles are going to be very kind of, I'm not going to say attached, because there's nothing really keep them physically there, but the risk again of aerolization, it's quite minimal. I would just suggest that you keep following the best practice rules that you do when dealing with the type of organism that you're studying. No special need to take care of add another layer just because of this type of collection.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question. So finally, is it better to collect viruses in liquid with the Coriolis micro or on dry way with the Coriolis compact? I think it's a good question to finish the session.
It is a good question, and it's one that I get quite a lot also from technical advice. So for the detection itself, if you're looking for detection, presence or absence of RNA, viral RNA, either way would be compatible with the Coriolis Compact on a dry collection or with the Coriolis Micro on a liquid. Then the only issue will be if you're looking for culturing the virus, then yes, I would recommend that you do the collection on a liquid directly using the Coriolis Micro.
Okay, thank you. No, I think you answer perfectly. Oh, and just one last question. Is there, so we mentioned a lot indeed PCR for detection of virus. Is there any information available on recovery of infection viruses recoverable in cell culture?
You mean in cell culture, like the aerolization, or?
Yeah, so if I may, indeed, the majority, as you mentioned, the majority of the paper doesn't try to cultivate the virus with the cell culture. We know it's possible. In this case, Coriolis Micro will be the best because we know that having the virus during a long time without any media, it will damage too much the virus to be alive and be able to infect viruses. The main thing to keep in mind to culture viruses is that protocol will need to be optimized. You will need to find the best combination between which type of liquid you are using, what is the best time and the best airflow to collect the viruses. We know it's doable because we have several users that are doing it. It's not yet published, so we don't have the details about the protocol, but it's doable if you know how to manage viruses also after the collection.
Yeah, and if I may add just quickly, as an alternative for culturing viruses, you can also use viability PCR. It's still in development, the technology, but there's an option where you can use PMA to tag the viable cells in your sample, and then you can detect the RNA that is really coming only from the viable cells in your sample. So that could be an option as well.
Okay, thank you, Mariana. I would like also to thank all the participants and VWR Avantor to invite us to do this webinar and be able to share with you the protocols with our instrument. Thank you all. Have a good afternoon and hope to see you soon.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Thank you to Sophie and Mariana, and have a very nice evening, all of you. For the attendees, it would be great if you could fill in also the follow-up in the survey so that we can have a look on your thoughts about this webinar. Thank you very much and have a nice evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.